Hello, welcome, and I hope you're enjoying your summer, at least if you're listening from the Northern Hemisphere. Today, we'll be talking about the last parliamentary elections in France with Selma Benjabala, who is a research engineer at the Center for Sociopolitical Data at Sciences Po University in Paris, and Nicolas Sauger, who is professor of political science also at Sciences Po. Welcome both.
Hello.
As our listeners will already know, President Macron called a snap parliamentary election after his party's debacle in the June European Parliament election, where the radical right came first. So, of course, France has a semi-presidential system, so there's both a president and a prime minister, but obviously the president cannot push through his legislative agenda without the support of parliament. Now, at the parliamentary election, President Macron's alliance lost 86 seats and came third after the left-wing New Popular Front and the radical right, at least in terms of seats. So, Selma and Nicola, judging from the outcome of the election, was the decision to call it a miscalculation on the side of Macron? I mean, he said that this election would help clarify things. Has it?
Well, obviously not. Well, given that we still don't have any government in sight, and we're not going to have it probably in next days. So basically, well, this is a clear miscalculation if it was aiming at giving a clear majority in the French Parliament. Whether it's natural miscalculation on other levels, maybe not, because to some extent, in my sense at least, this decision was more linked to the issue of 2027, that is the next round of presidential elections. And to some extent, Macron's bet, in my mind, was more to try to lose this one and win the next one rather than winning the first one and losing the second one, which was more important, of course.
Yes, so was it a miscalculation? Yes and no. I would agree with Nicolas. Yes, in the sense that we still do not have any new government in sight, and it will probably take weeks, even not months. But not that much if we consider that, well, the center has gained from the withdrawal of center-left candidates in the second round. And it will be a miscalculation if President Macron is forced to resign. Of course, in that case, it will be a miscalculation, but in the time being, it is not yet.
Yeah, and I could even add up on that to some extent. Well, the fact that the center party from Macron has saved its skin in this election is quite a surprise and quite a victory to some extent. Not an actual victory, of course, because it's not a major win, but to some extent, a few weeks before the elections, it was quite a common assumption that the Macron's party is not going to survive the legislative election. So to the extent, it's not so bad. Well, it's not good, but not so bad.
Looking at what happened during the elections, and particularly looking at how voters reacted in the second round to the possibility of having a radical right majority in parliament, is it fair to say that many voters chose to vote against the far right rather than for a specific political agenda? And what implications can this have in the future?
Well, it is estimated that for the first round, around 35–40% of the voters chose to vote against the far-right party. It might be a bit more for the second round, but in terms of implication, of course, it did not solve the main challenge of what is a social program, what is the political orientation for the next government. And the biggest challenge overall might be to reconcile these divided parts of the French society, and how to make up a new unity between these main parts of society.
And what you see as well in the French landscape just right now, that there's a lot of volatility since, well, probably since the 90s, where a lot of different parties have appeared, disappeared, changed in terms of fate, in terms of actual support. and then any kind of actual estimate of what's going to happen. What has happened is quite complicated to actually understand, even to describe sometimes. And then we don't know exactly what else actually is going to happen and what is the actual meaning of all that. Because to some extent, the fact that voters don't positively choose a candidate in runoff is quite common sense for the two-round majority system, because basically, well, it was old wisdom that in the second round you just eliminate the candidate you like the less. But at the same time, well, it doesn't mean much in terms of substance. And I think that we are all, well, a number of colleagues have said and emphasized that now more and more people do support the their national rally actual program in the election, rather than just protest against the incumbent party. I think it's more or less more blurred or less clear from the voter's eye, but still we see that it's not completely disappeared, because when some parties call against national rally, well, it works to some extent. So it's really a mixed picture that, well, nothing has completely changed, but well, things are changing slowly, maybe not in the right direction, but that's another question.
I want to pick up on that last point that you mentioned. So this is not the first time that French voters have been called to the polls to stop the radical right. However, this situation seems to be happening more and more often, and it looks like the far right keeps consolidating their support and getting better at fighting elections. So is the radical right getting closer and closer to gaining political power in France, or is that completely out of the question?
Well, it is clear that the French National Rally has increased the number of seats from 6 in 17 to more than 85 in 22, and now in 24 to 144. So it is increasing, and it is progressively increasing. So it's not a defeat for the French National Rally. But at the same time, what we are looking at is that it seems that the center-left, the pro-European center-left, is undergoing a kind of revival, because they have doubled the number of seats. To a less extent, the same applies to the Républicains, because they did a quite good election so far. So somehow the political landscape is undergoing some kind of evolution, but the question is that for these two mainstream parties, left and right, there is no obvious candidate for 27. Whereas for the French National Rally, it seems obvious that Marine Le Pen is still the leader of the party.
2027 is when the next presidential election is due to take place.
Well, in terms of evolution, to remember that in 2002, that tells, well, more than 20 years ago, we were completely shocked by the fact that Jean-Marie Le Pen was in the second round against Jacques Chirac at that time, and it was quite a tremendous shock, even if it did only 20% of the express votes in the second round, but still it was still something. And to some extent, it has been now 40 years that the National Front or the National Rally are performing quite well in France, with high and lows, of course, but rather higher and higher. And it was the case we thought, 20 years ago, probably, that there was a kind of glass ceiling for the national, at the point, National Front, that, 20%, maybe 22, 25 was really maximum that they can't actually surpass. But it's not the case. We actually view that, now the National Front or the National Rally can do whatever, and the Mediterranean system, which worked against it just for long, is now not working for them, but at least working quite in an important manner, let's say that, because that's kind of trespass this threshold of, let's say 30% of the vote. And then when you're above that, then you have quite likely more representatives than if you're below it.
Let's now talk a little bit about the new Popular Front. So this is left-wing alliance that was formed shortly before the election, and it came first in the parliamentary election, but didn't achieve a parliamentary majority. So they were very quick to say that they should be able to be the ones choosing the next prime minister, but they don't seem to be able to come up with a name, and they seem to be quite divided. So first of all, what parties are part of this alliance? And then how likely is it that it will all fall apart in the next few weeks?
Well, parties being a member of the New Popular Front are basically three main or three more formal parties, but the LFI, that is Mélenchon's party, it's quite a new party. To some extent, it was a splinter of different parties, and it has formed during the presidential campaign, of the two last presidential campaigns, as a rally of the supporters of Mélenchon. So it's quite personalistic, and it's quite new form of party, just trying to have some inspiration of these platform parties. We're gathering members from all over the places without having a clear organization such as the other parties, but still it's quite this kind of new left-wing populist movement that we know in different places, but which is, well, still quite new in France. We have the Socialist Party, which is, well, the traditional Socialist Party, which has been quite weak in the various past elections, except for the last European election, for which it did perform quite better than expected, which is still something, about 14% of the vote in the final count. And two other parties, the Greens. Now, well, they have different names, but the Greens and Europe Écologie Les Verts, which is basically the Green Party, and the Communist Party as well, the smallest partner, but still, which has some kind of support, because, for instance, just right now, we have the election of the president of the lower house of the Assemblée Nationale, and the candidate for this coalition is one from the communists, to some extent, because, well, the weaker bloc has sometimes an advantage in terms of pushing something. What does it mean? Well, the alliance was really surprising because it did perform quite well in 2022 for the present legislative elections after a failed but, well, quite awful presidential elections for the left, because Mélenchon did perform quite well in that election. It came third, of course, but quite close to the second candidate. And the surprise, to some extent, was that it survived, or it has been reformed or changed anew to some extent in 2024, because we all thought it was collapsing last year because there was a lot of conflicts within the coalition. But still, in a matter of days, they have managed to actually form or choose common candidates in most districts. Now, to some extent, because it has been really quick, most of the debated issues or debated questions among the coalition haven't been actually addressed. Hence, we have now problems of leadership. Well, to some extent, La France Insoumise is willing to be the leader in this bloc, but it's not accepted by the other. It's the most numerous, it's the party that most representatives in the assembly, but to some extent the coalition of Parti Socialiste and the Greens is bigger. So what is the bigger? Well, who knows? And there's a problem of substance, let's say that, because a number of issues haven't been addressed. And well, there are disagreements on many different issues in terms of, well, immigration, energy, environment, security, or whatever. You can pick whatever you want. There are a number of disagreements. Of course, there are a number of symbolic agreements just on some pack of the different parties, but that's not an actually consistent program to some extent. What's going to happen the next days, we don't actually know, because it's going to be a big surprise. If I would have to bet, well, my easiest or my most likely bet are that the new popular movement is not going to make it for the prime ministership, not because of Macron, but to some extent because of strategic dilemmas. To some extent, for La France Insoumise, it's either do as if they had a majority position in the National Assembly, which is not the case. And then it's going to be problematic to actually implement a program. And if they can't implement big changes or less symbolic changes, it's going to be a problem in the next election. And then saying that and putting the blame on the other parties, Macron, the left, other left parties, or wherever you want, is going to be to position them in better shape to actually fight the big prize in the French system, which is the next presidential elections. And it could be a cost on the short term to actually get access to the government position or premiership.
Yes, it's clear that it's an eclectic group from radical forces to more moderate ones. And I think that the main leaders of the new Front Populaire were a bit taken by surprise by the results of the second round. And of course, when it comes to propose a name for the prime minister, all the internal divisions came up. Now it's very complicated for them to agree on name. Some names were put forward by the France Insoumise and the Communist Party with Huguette below. But of course, it was not a consensual figure and it was not acceptable for the Socialist Party. And on the contrary, the Socialist Party and the Greens proposed the name of Laurence Toubiana, but she was too Macron compatible for the France Insoumise. So it comes to an kind of dead end. My guess is also that they do not. Actually, they say that they will organize a vote to find a common name, but even if they find a common name by vote, I don't think that it will be the next Prime Minister of France.
But the problem in the case is there is no majority in the parliament. Whatever your kind of calculation you can actually have, well, any kind of big coalition is going to be at high risk for any of the party participating in this coalition, because basically no one wants to ally itself with Macron or whatever is related to Macron, because it's going to be a sure loss in the next election. And if you don't participate in that, and there's of course no possibility of allying of the different extremes, because there's nothing in common between the different extremes. And then what is the kind of solution? I think it's going to be really complicated. And then the solution of a kind of compromise, which is going to survive for a few months, is quite likely. And then we're going to have new compromises without actual majority. It's the most likely scenario in my understanding, at least. And then we're going to have, well, different ways of surviving the period, just waiting for the next election. And to some extent, it's the next election, the campaign for the next elections that has actually started just right now.
Both of you were mentioning that the parties seem to be focusing a lot on winning the next presidential election. What effects do you think this kind of political maneuvering can have on the French public and their trust in political institutions at the moment?
Well, I think it's clear that all these calculations that are going on within each party may be a kind of asset for the French National Rally, because it could give the image, the feeling for that, well, it's all about political maneuver, it's all about political ambitions, and everyone is playing his own game in view of 27. So. But it's purely hypothetical. I don't have any confirmation of that, but I think it might be the kind of consequences it might have.
Let's be optimistic. Well, the actual confidence, trust in politicians is so low just right now that it can't go lower. So basically, it can't have that negative effect. But, well, I think that's going to be really complicated, because on the one hand, the partisans or the members of the supporters of the different parties, especially on the left, but on radical right as well, are really thinking that they have been robbed of their victory, and then they're disappointed and they want radical policies. At the same time, radical policies in this parliament is just impossible. So basically, and the centrist, well, supporters are just few now, and more by refusal of the radical solution than actual agreement with the centrist positions. then, well, everybody is quite, and well, I won't use any term that comes to mind just right now because, well, solution is not good for anyone. Let's say that.
So President Macron has accepted the current Prime Minister's resignation, but he also asked him to stay until there is a new government. So at the moment, it looks like Macron has just taken a back seat and is not proposing any candidate for Prime Minister. He's not taking the initiative. Why do you think this is the case? What is he waiting for?
Well, it might be that he wants to signal that he has not given up on governing, basically. It might be one explanation. And well, I think he's betting on the internal divisions within the new Front Populaire, and so it's a way to gain some time.
Yeah, I really think that, well, he has to prove a point that there is nothing actually working without him, and that he needs some time for actually showing that, and then he hopes that's going to give him some power in the end. Quite unlikely in my opinion, but it's still the case. And maybe, well, there are one short-term event, well, the Olympics, that makes it, well, quite, well, necessary, let's say, to have something working at least a bit in the administration and at the government. And second, well, there is a kind of strategic question for Macron that if he proposes any name, then because he proposes some name, it's going to be refused by most of the actors. So it's better to say, well, you're proposing me something, and then we can either try and it's going to collapse, or not try, and that's reason why, and that's going to be more difficult. But here he has quite a nice play, just waiting. Well, he has, to some extent, if I'm optimistic once again, that's a way to say, well, hey, yeah, I'm not completely the winner of this election. Nobody has won this election. And then, well, nobody at the same time manages to get an agreement which is sufficient to get a majority in parliament. And then maybe this gives some possibility for the future.
Yes, I would add also that within the Renaissance group, there are some kind of evolutions or shifts, internal shifts, because some of MPs wanted to or want to sit with another group moving towards the center left, while other are maybe hesitating, moving towards the center right. So I think he's also waiting for his main group to redefine itself and to see on which forces he could count on parliament.
Well, we could say that all parties are quite divided just right now in France. And to some extent, even the National Rally is quite divided, well, is somewhat divided just right now, because between different trends and with the big issue that has been quite important for, in the internal politics of the party about the quality of candidates, because to some extent we have had a lot of scandals about open racism in National Front, open anti-Semitism, open, well, anti-everything. And that has been quite a cost or a problem for the party in the election itself. But it's also quite a problem in the internal politics of the National Rally, because on the strategic orientation on the one hand, just whether they should remain radical to some extent or not so radical, and in terms of who's going to be the actual leaders to some extent, because of course there is this kind of tandem between Bardella, the young new leader, and the Marine Le Pen, the older, more prominent but less involved in internal politics of the National Rally. But there is a chance or risk that at some point these different dynamics are going to increase the tension, internal tensions within the party, because of course there are more to win. There's going to be plenty of money in the next years in the party, and this could trigger some dispute, maybe.
Yeah. And it's interesting to observe that now Jordan Bardella is focusing more, at least it is what he's saying, on the European Parliament stage, where he seems to be more and more involved, making lots of speeches around the Viktor Orban position in the EU Council, etc., etc. So it seems to be some kind of redefinition of roles within the National Rally.
What are the chances that France will end up with no prime minister? Is this a realistic scenario, or do you think it will be averted at all costs?
Well, we can't have no prime minister. If we have no prime minister, it means Attal is going to be ongoing or technical minister for months, which is, I'm sure, not that what he wants. There has to be some solution. I think as it is just started, it's going to be more in the, let's say in September, end of August or September, and maybe with summer, it's going to ease a bit negotiations. But just right now, I don't see any likely solution. Well, any stable likely solution, let's say, because of course we can have a prime minister, but he's going to anchor a censorship quite rapidly or quickly from the National Assembly, most likely.
In my view, the most likely scenario is that we will have kind of minority governments. I don't see any perspective for a technical government because there is three main blocks in the lower house, and I don't see any technical government having enough votes, enough support among MPs within the French National Assembly. So
yeah, but at the same time, we could have a kind of low profile, a bit technical government because there is some kind of awareness from the blocks that if no one's want to actually have the premiership, then they have to still find something, and then it's better to have something which is not too costly rather than just nothing, because you can't have nothing. You have some responsibility at some point.
And so do you think if there is eventually a minority government, even if it's a technical government, do you think that they'll be able to get some support from beyond Macron's own group, so some support, for example, from the center left and from the center right as well?
It can't be a stable long-term support from any party, I would say that. I would say that it's possible that some agreement is reached on a number of proposals of initiatives, but in any case, it would be not that many, and this government wouldn't take that many important decisions in any case, because any important decisions is going to be problematic, which is, of course, a problem as well, because, the kind of decision to be made on actual public spending, on the growing problem of public debts, then you need some kind of actual decision or choice. And that's what's going to happen is not that clear. The most likely solution, in my opinion, is some kind of consensus on not changing too much, because this is still fueling some kind of claim from the left and from the right to change on the retirement age, and it's good for the next presidential campaign, for instance. And if you just suppress that just right now, that's bad for the future. So let's keep it for the sake of having a good competition next time, or something like that. I would tend to be a bit in this direction for something which is workable, which is not deciding much.
yes, and 27 is in 3 years' time, so it has a long run to go.
Yeah, it's a long time for an unstable government.
It's quite likely that, if that's that unstable, that the president, Macron, could once again dissolve the National Assembly in 1 year. And it's unlikely that it's going to be for 3 years if you have really an unstable government.
You don't think he will end up resigning? I mean, he will most likely just call another snap parliamentary election before resigning.
He has no reason to resign to some extent, and it's not going to solve anything if he resigns, except that, it's a kind of, let's say, just, hazard thing, whether it's going to be radical left versus radical right, center versus right or left. Nobody knows, so I'm not sure that there are so many people actually wanting the resignation of Macron. So I'm thinking that even the opposition party wouldn't push too much in this direction. And Macron, as he presents himself, is not going to renounce an ounce of power if he has it. And so it's unlikely that, and I don't see the scenario, a credible scenario that he would resign to actually rerun for a third mandate because it would be quite disputable in terms of constitutional law, and hopefully is not going to be to try to make this kind of choice.
Okay, our time is up. So thank you very much, Selma and Nicolas, for making French politics a little bit clearer for us. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I hope both of you and also our listeners enjoy not just this podcast, but also the rest of your summer. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.